Nintendo undercuts with Gamecube. PlayStation is coming to Dreamcast. And Namco, Enix and Square team up. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man.
What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the podcast where we travel back in time 40, 30, or 20 years to see what was making headlines in the video game and home computer industries. This month we'll be going back to July of 2001. And our usual co-host Peter is still out on vacation, so as always, no, not as always, last time we had Mads, but we have our favorite, Mads, our favorite co-host, guest co-host, oh my goodness, it's getting too late. John is back. Hi, John.
Hey there. Glad to be back.
Yes, glad to have you back. So, let's get straight to the obligatory banter section. So, what you been up to?
Me, I've just been retro gaming. We, I believe last time we recorded, or you had me on the show, we had just aired an episode or just recorded it. So I'm kind of in that limbo in between our next episode and now. So I've just been working and keeping shelter during COVID times.
Now, you're talking, of course, of the amazing podcast that you are a co-host of, the Retro Game Squad, correct?
That's of course, yeah. I figured that was assumed, but
you kind of do the plugging. I mean, I know you guys are bigger than us, but come on.
Oh no, we're not we're not that crazy, but it's still fun. It's a passion project as much as I like following your enthusiasm for the retro video game newsroom.
So when you guys got the next episode scheduled for?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to say Q3 of this year. We're already in Q3 right now, so we don't have an official date, but if you check out our Discord, we have updates there, and we also update Facebook, I think, still, and we've got our Patreon. Cool.
So we'll put links to all that in the show notes below, so you'll be well represented, and everybody should go check it out because, that's like, for me, it's the old school podcast. I've talked about it on the show before. I freaking love it, and been listening almost since the beginning. Early single-digit episodes, I think, is when I jumped on. So,
yeah, that's quite a throwback. We appreciate we appreciate the kind words for sure.
No, you guys rock. It's always fun to listen to, and I love the different perspectives. And I have played so many games I never heard about because of your show. So.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I mean, we've got the goof down. You've got the actual facts. I love just the facts. It's cool to have a different.
Just the facts, Jeff.
Right, exactly.
Well, not just the facts, because of course every episode we have a little segment called 7 Minutes in Heaven, where the co-host has to sit down with a game that was reviewed in the month that we're talking about. And remember, everybody, for the purposes of this podcast, we're always talking about publications dated July 2001. That always means the news and the games, of course, came out at some different time, but it's a framing device. So I gave you a ton of cool games because this is also the month where the launch lineup for the Game Boy Advance got reviewed in all the US mags. So I offered you things like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 on the Game Boy Advance, Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Red Faction, I had Super Dodgeball Advance, and you told me you wanted the dogs.
Well, the top ones you had given me, I had played before. So I was like, let's play something that I have not played, and I want to play something that probably wouldn't have had a chance otherwise. So, yes, the dogs.
Okay, and of the three choices I gave you, There was Simpsons Wrestling for the PlayStation 1. Absolute classic dog, right up there with Masters of Terraskazi. Hologram Time Traveler, the PC release of Sega's Time Traveler holographic arcade game. And the one you chose, Star Wars Super Bombad Racing for the PlayStation 2.
I definitely chose that because even just saying that name makes me happy.
Okay, well, let's send you off to play your 7 Minutes in Heaven, and when you come back, we're going to find out if it still makes you happy after playing it.
Yes, we will.
John, welcome back from your 7 Minutes in Heaven. So, how would you describe Super Bombad Racing?
I'm trying to think of a few choice words that aren't expletives or... No, this game is a charming kart-esque racer that's just a hot mess through and through. I that's probably the best way I can describe it. But I loved it.
You loved it.
I loved it. It's my kind of weird. It's the games that you pick up and you're like, what the heck is this? And then I pick it up and I'm like, I need to play this.
Okay. So let's step back a moment and explain to our listeners. So, what is it? What is happening in this game?
Sure. Yeah. Well, they don't give you an intro. They just throw you in there. So I guess you're just these chibi Star Wars characters, all the hit ones from the first installment of the Star Wars story, Episode 1, and.
Sorry. People of a certain age, when you say the first installment, then you say Episode 1, it's like there's a dissonance in our brains. When
I specifically said story because that also makes me cringe. I'm just trying to sell this as they would sell it when you see this hot mess sitting on the shelf there waiting for you to buy it. Yeah, it's oh man, yeah. I can't stop using the word hot mess because it's hot, but it's also a mess.
So it's a kart racer using Star Wars Episode 1 characters in a chibi format.
Yes, big heads, tiny bodies, small cars. What could go wrong?
I've seen the video a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, for the 7 minutes, it gives you a good vertical slice. To the credit of this game, you can go from 0 to playing the meat of the game in time it out, 2 minutes, I think, minus load times. But yeah, it's charming. You're racing against 7 other kart racers. I should know that number because I just played it. But you're racing around a typical track and shooting power-ups. I don't even know what half the stuff does. It's so funny. It's you want one button to do your thing and you want another button to go. And this is there's a button to jump, there's a button to throw stuff, and there's a button to brake, and there's a button or the joystick. You also get to control your vertical angle as well, you're flying these damn carts. So
wow. It sounds overly complicated for a kart racer.
Exactly. It's a little too complicated, and it's no Diddy Kong Racing if you think about having the flight mechanic. It's just it's so easy to go wrong. I remember the first lap, I caught a wall and was guaranteed fourth or below in the placing really early.
Wow. Well, you also got caught on a tree at one point in the second level.
Yes, at the very end, I got caught on the cardboard cutout of a tree. I stuck there for a minute. It's prime that era of game design when it was done quickly and was a kart racer. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the historical context here is, I think, very important because we mentioned a few times on the show, but this is summer of 2001. Keep getting the year wrong, but summer of 2001, the PlayStation 2, which this game is for, has been out for about a year at this point, and there's little to nothing in the way of a killer title. It's pretty lackluster of a library so far. There's a lot of stuff coming. I mean, E3 just happened, but there's really little on the market, and this game is just another example of, oh my god, this is what next gen is supposed to be, and it's a game that probably could have been pulled off somewhat passively already on the PlayStation 1 from the game mechanics and everything.
Absolutely. I think if they lowered the poly count, the PlayStation probably could have handled it better than the PS2 did. It had a lot of issues with low frame rates in segments that definitely did not help the package that game is.
Yeah, I mean it's clearly it's clearly suffering from either they needed to get it out fast, or the designers and programmers just haven't come to grips yet with the relatively complex dual CPU structure of the PlayStation 2. Which a lot of people are still complaining about. I mean, there's articles every month in the magazines about how developers are ticked off with it. People are predicting Sony's going to fail because nobody can come to grips with this overly complex architecture, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some this game is just another one of those voices that at the time were very loud, that the PlayStation 2 was destined to fail. We all know that that's not what happens, but it's a very believable narrative at this point in time.
Sure, and that's after the Jaguar had a similar issue, and the Saturn had a similar issue with just these wild architectures that, until the very end, they were finally getting tapped for their full potential.
Yeah, and I mean, PlayStation 2 is not going to have to wait that long, because by the end of the year, we're going to have GTA 3. We're going to have Jak and Daxter. We're going to have Metal Gear Solid 2. We're going to have, what's it called, Twisted Metal Black. I mean, PlayStation 2, by the end of this year, is going to have a library that any console in history would have died to have.
Right.
But it's all still on the horizon. In summer of 2001, you're like, well, I guess it's a cheap DVD player. That's good.
That's true. A lot of people, I guess at the time, were people still eyeballing it as like, hey, it's a game console, but I can also play DVDs on it.
Oh, definitely. That was its selling point. That was the reason why it didn't completely fizzle out in the first 9 months.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't put that in perspective. And of course, until those blockbusters come out, you're stuck with mom and dad getting you Super Bombad Racing, and you're gonna love it. That's all you got.
Well, and that's really the problem. I mean, I remember living through this time. I mean, I was just about to start. No, I'd already started law school at this point.
Oh wow!
And yeah, so I mean, I'm an adult. We're going to put that in quotation marks. But I remember what this market looked like and what was going on at the time, and it was just like PlayStation 2, dude. What the hell happened to Sony? Where are the games? What? PlayStation 1 was known for having this super simple architecture and great software support from Sony, and developers could just hit the ground running. And PlayStation 2 it took a year for the devs to finally come to grips with it. But when they did, holy crap, they did. But at this point, it was like, dude, if you want a DVD player, you kind of have to buy it. And and that's what people did.
Such a crazy coincidence and how that worked out for him.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
But, okay, so your assessment then, if you had to put it into one sentence?
Cheap but enjoyable, don't expect a lot. Also Star Wars.
Excellent. Also Star Wars. Okay, perfectly legit. Okay, in that case then, let's move on to our next segment before we turn on the time machine and check in with our good friend Ethan for the Department of Corrections. Welcome back to the Department of Corrections, Ethan.
Yeah.
So, you're going to tell me all the things that I got wrong
so many
of 2001. But first, we must take care of an important matter.
Yes.
That of
the Peter comment. As it goes.
Yeah, baby.
Alrighty. Peter was reminiscing, as he is in my relative age group. He was reminiscing over some of the Harry Potter games. And I will tell you that the Chamber of Secrets game is genuinely not bad. It's a very nice game, and like you can just get on your broom and just fly around the castle and whatnot. It reminds me a lot of Spider-Man 2, for that same generation of consoles. So if you like that game, Chamber of Secrets, not a terrible movie license, actually.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Granted, the bar isn't very high for movie licenses, but
true.
That's cool.
Yeah, there's some fun puzzles and all that stuff. I think I beat it. It's not too difficult. Just a kid's game, but a pretty well done one in terms of someone like me who just likes to screw around in those types of games.
Cool. And sometimes that's all you really need a game for.
Yeah. All right, now we are into the trenches, the great fight of 2001. When you're talking about this Nintendo message that they sent out to retailers. Now, I'm not going to exactly defend Nintendo on this, but what I am going to say about this is that prior to this period in the 2000s, there wasn't really such a thing as we are announcing something a year ahead of time, like a major announcement, and we're going to dangle it out of reach as the carrot for you to string along. Hype culture didn't really exist before that point. And on the retailer end, it's not something that you could really expect to bank on.
Okay. The retailer end, I will agree with you. I would call complete and utter bullshit on the first half due to the fact that all the consoles, all the 16-bit consoles were released at least a year in advance in Japan. All the magazines were touting and showing them off. Nintendo
There's a difference
did a
between
huge deal with the Super Nintendo.
Doing this.
No, wait. Nintendo made sure that all the U.S. magazines got to see first pictures of Pilot Wings and so forth almost a year before the launch of the Super Nintendo in Japan. That means 2 years before it hit the U.S. shores, just to make sure everybody knew, hey, don't bother with the Genesis. We're going to come out with a good.
I would dispute you on that, especially on the fact of Nintendo actually sending those out. I'm not sure that's the case. I think they just got it from the Famitsu coverage and reprinted it. Or Famimaga, or whatever it is. Like, because I know where these screenshots originally come from. They didn't get original screenshots. They got them from these Japanese magazines. So I don't think Nintendo did that deliberately in the first case. And secondly, you're talking about video game magazines, you're talking about a dedicated audience. This is different than putting up a sign in a retail store that Xbox is coming in November 2001. That is a very different sort of audience that you're tapping into there. That's what I would call modern hype culture. You know, I'm not saying there was no anticipation for games before this, but that sort of, we are announcing something way off and we are going to string you along with deliberately creating sort of marketing material around the game. That didn't exist until the 2000s.
I will concur with you on that, yes. And I mean, it kind of falls into the, we also had episode 1 around this time where people were waiting, for days at a time for tickets, including myself. I waited a whole day for tickets. Oh yeah, dude. It was a party atmosphere. You got to give them that.
Yeah, but, there's in cultural terms, there's a bit of a benefit to that. I'm not big on hype culture, but that's separate from just the historical view of. I don't think it I get where Nintendo is coming from. At the same time, I do believe it's a cynical thing.
Oh, I completely agree. I'm very cynical. Then again, the idea that Nintendo calls Microsoft this company that's not in the games business at all, it's like Microsoft is selling a lot of software in these stores already, but on PC. It's not like they're not a presence in that retail environment already. And this was also the period when Microsoft was selling all their joysticks and joypads and mice and all this stuff. They were a powerhouse presence at retail, especially video game retailers like Electronics Boutique and stuff. So the fact, that they're announcing this product coming out, there's a very good reason why the retailers would be looking at this going, yeah, sure, we can do this. But
so I think there was a disturbance in the cycle when they did that. But, now we've adjusted to it. There's something that is expected. We take pre-orders and all that kind of stuff on a regular basis. It didn't exist before this point. That's just a perspective I just wanted to put through on this.
Well, and it's also one of the reasons why I included the story. Because, ultimately the story is it's a tempest in a teapot type of thing, but it does indicate how the marketing has changed. And it also, the fact that the market was going through a downturn at the time, Nintendo had a point in saying, why are you guys doing this for a product that's not out yet? It's not going to, all it can do is dissuade sales at this point. And they weren't wrong in that argument.
So, that's it on that. On to the next bit. You were talking about a new company founded by Jeff Tennell, who is the co-founder of Dynamics.
Yes.
With Damon Sly.
This is true. Yes.
Back in the 80s. I can't remember exactly when. I never really knew about Dynamics, and now all the old computer buffs are just huge on everything Dynamics ever did, and it's a.
Yeah, Dynamics for me is it is my favorite studio. Plain and simple. And not because their games were necessarily always the best, even though my favorite game of all time was one of theirs. But it's because anytime you saw that Dynamics logo, you knew you were about to see something that nobody would dare to do. That was always 5 years ahead of its time. Games like Die Hard on PC, which was basically Tomb Raider. You see your character from behind. He's a digitized sprite, but the entire world is a 3D vector thing. And it's an open world. You can run around every room. The bathrooms are there, everything. And then when you have interactions, there's scanned images popping up. It's all in EGA. You've got inventory management. It's a fascinating game. It doesn't play for crap, but it's amazing that they were thinking this far ahead. Project Firestart, my all-time favorite on the Commodore 64. I mean, it's survival horror. Complete. Every aspect that we see later on in Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark, and so forth, it's already there in this game from 1989. It's just these guys were always so far ahead of the curve. You just wanted to see what they were going to come up with next.
I played a good amount of Incredible Machine back in the day, so I have that little bit of connection.
That was already their nadir. I mean, when they started making sequels to their games, that was one thing they really never did, with the exception of Nova 9, which was a sequel to Stellar 7. But they had never done a sequel up until The Incredible Machine. It was always, we have too many new ideas, we're going to do something new and better. And the history of the company is just, of their product at least, is fascinating. And I've been trying to get Jeff Tunnell on the show for ages, and no response, and it's so frustrating.
All right, so we'll go past Carl's emotional hang-ups and talk about an interview that he did get with Mr. Paul Neurath, which is it up on the Patreon feed? I forget.
I don't even know.
He doesn't remember, but either way,
yeah, it's coming soon.
He said Looking Glass Entertainment. It was initially Looking Glass Studios. Well, initially it was Technology. So Looking Glass Technologies, and then Looking Glass Studios when Intermetrics bought them in 1996.
Gotcha.
And Peter was wondering about the Looking Glass name. And I'm sure this might have been told differently elsewhere, but I talked to Ned Lerner, and he was the co-founder of Looking Glass when they merged their two companies together. And what he remembers is that they were thinking of this idea of the computer as another world, as kind of a reflection of a different reality. And they had this, the Alice story, Alice Through the Looking Glass, in their head, but that wasn't necessarily the inspiration. They wanted to communicate something of a portal through which you go through your computer screen into a new world. And that's why Looking Glass.
Makes sense, especially given their product line.
Yes, Looking Glass, of course, very interesting studio, and I have talked to many, many people there, and we'll probably do a book on them at some point, if somebody doesn't see to it, in which case there is no point.
Just there may be a book in the process, in the making. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You may want to get on that.
All right. There goes my hopes and dreams as well. All right, on to the next bit. Talking about the strangeness of Sim Golf. Of course, the greatest anticlimax of all time, if you follow video game designers. But we were wondering if Maxis was around before SimCity. No, Maxis was formed specifically for SimCity. Because Broderbund published it, but they did it under an affiliated label program. Well, it's so Maxis published it, Broderbund distributed it.
That's it,
under their affiliated label.
Yeah,
so
Don Daglow explained that in my interview with him.
Yeah, he was one of the producers as part of that affiliated label program. So go listen to that interview rather than me ramble on about it. All right, and the final thing, you were talking about the Harry Potter games and how this is the first time that games outside of sports games have been annualized. I would dispute this on the basis of we had at least 2 AAA series that had been rather annualized before this. Lara Croft and Street Fighter both had total annual releases. Lara Croft did it for 3-4 years without missing a beat.
3 years. Because 4 comes out. It may have been 4. It may have been.
I think it was 4, and Street Fighter had consistent releases. Sometimes they would release several in the same year, which was not always the best.
I was about to say that was less of an annualized thing and more of a okay, will the operators buy another board? Okay, we'll do it. Type of situation.
And they did it in the home too. There's like 3 versions for the Super Nintendo and whatnot. So I would say that counts.
4 versions.
4?
4
okay.
versions? No, wait. I'm thinking.
There's Super Street Fighter 2. There's Turbo. Championship Edition, I believe.
Well, yeah, there's regular, champion, super, and then Super Turbo.
Okay.
So those are the 4. And then you also have Street Fighter Alpha 2.
Yeah, so that
comes out. So 5 for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, they're not just on the one console, and then of course when they went to the PlayStation, they were still releasing them and all that. So I would say that counts as annualized on a pretty consistent basis since 1990.
But it was never planned as annualized. Not the way Harry Potter is actually announcing right up front, we're doing these annualized with the movies.
I'm not even sure that stuck. I can't remember.
No, it didn't quite stick because they missed a year in the movies. They missed 1 year for the movies. I can't remember what the problem was. So that did get pushed around a little bit, but I think they may have filled the gap with some offshoot games, but...
Anyways, I don't think that's
it gets
a meaningful distinction on my end, but you do you, Carl.
I'm just saying they announced it as annualized, which Lara Croft and Street Fighter became annualized due to their massive success, not because it was a grand scheme.
Whatever. All right. Department of Corrections is corrected for this month.
Excellent. Ethan, thank you as always. A pleasure. And we shall see you back here next month for more corrections.
Kabing.
Yeah, that's a lot of next gen, current gen, at the time commentary there.
Yes. It's kind of funny how past his prologue and I got to give Ethan credit. He in retrospect, he is right. The Xbox hype machine really was a unique thing that set a new stage. The whole pre-order a year in advance and stuff like that. Nobody else had really done that, or not quite a year in advance, but almost a year in advance of the console. Mm-hmm. That was new, and nobody had ever done that at retail before, and it did change the way a lot of retail sales worked. So to this day,
right? They had Microsoft money behind them, so they definitely used every bit of it.
Mm-hmm. And you can't blame them for doing that because, well, if you got Microsoft money, why not use Microsoft money?
Exactly.
Look at the money-losing Game Pass business model. Okay, but they own Bethesda, so it's all good. Or something. Okay, I'm losing my train of thought. Let's turn on the time machine. And we're heading back 20 years to July of 2001.
Nintendo's Gamecube system.
We're unveiling the Xbox
2001.
This is a computer game.
Welcome back to July of 2001. John, what's our first headline?
E3 news. GameCube to launch at $199.
Undercutting both PS2 and Xbox by $100, the GameCube will launch at just $200 in November. With a launch library that is far less adult-oriented than Sony and Microsoft's offerings, this price point just might make GameCube the clear victor for the younger set.
This is an interesting title coming off of Super Bombad Racing that set the kid tone for the PlayStation 2 at the time, huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, those kind of games did exist, but they weren't the premier titles. Now, it is interesting to note that if you look at pictures of E3 this year, the main building has this giant picture of Jak and Daxter on it, which is, very light, especially the first game, a very light, cartoony looking set of characters for the PlayStation 2. So they're not completely abandoning the kid-oriented, but it still feels a little bit more like the Sonic attitude feel because, they're copping a pose, and Daxter has, sort of this one eye cocked open look on his face and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's clearly they're going more for the Sonic than the Mario feel. And the price point is definitely going to appeal to other people, but that price point is coming at the price of the cost of not having a full-size DVD drive in the machine, amongst other things.
Sure. Yeah, well, it's just interesting to see how Nintendo came out of the gates for this generation. I was just trying to use a slick segue for
well, no,
title Super Bombad Racing.
You did a great job.
Yeah, because Jak and Daxter, Nintendo has a lot of their characters and their game design is a little more ambiguous too as to the audience, whereas the Jak and Daxter 2 is like what you're getting out of that. It's a more not super gritty, but it's got more oomph to it than what we've grown up with the whole lifespan of the N64, because that was a family-oriented title, and I bet all the parents looking at that announcer are like, yes, I don't have to spend $300 or $400 on a console.
Yeah. I mean, both PS2 and Xbox were going for $300. PlayStation 2 is going to drop its price after Christmas, so in May of 2002 they will have a price cut. And some people were actually expecting them to cut the price before Christmas. But again, Sony didn't have the massive money cushion that Microsoft did. The Xbox is clearly being sold way under cost with a built-in hard drive and everything. But sure. I think Sony had enough confidence in its upcoming game launches. And we just talked about a little bit. GTA 3 gets shown at this show. Jak and Daxter gets shown. Metal Gear Solid 2 is still on the horizon. New Twisted Metal's on the horizon. And a ton of other games that are going to be hits for the PlayStation 2. I think Sony knew we've got enough cool stuff in the pipeline. We've got the built-in DVD functionality, which on the Xbox, you had to buy the remote control to unlock the DVD player.
I remember that, to get around the licensing for the DVD on every console.
Exactly. And so this is why Sony feels that their head start is secure. And Xbox is obviously never going to even come close to PlayStation sales. And Nintendo, like so many other times, or so many times since especially, is just doing their own thing and they don't care.
Absolutely. They got cool down. They're doing their cool thing and they're going to keep doing it.
Exactly. I mean, N64 was not the lead system. GameCube is definitely not going to be the biggest hit of this generation, but it is going to establish the hardware core that will become the Wii in a few years, and that will just kick tremendous amounts of ass.
True.
In the marketplace. I mean, if you're a hardcore gamer, you're like, Wii, who needs it? But it'll still play your Zelda, and a billion people will buy it for Wii Sports. So,
yep,
all
that's
good.
The one.
Okay. Other E3 news.
Exactly. I don't have a good segue for this one either, so I'm just going to go for it. Richard Garriott is going to wipe the slate clean.
Richard Garriott announced at E3 that the title of his next MMO will be Tabula Rasa. The sci-fi game promises to expand on the character-based aspects of Ultima Online and to minimize grind. A very ambitious late 2003 launch date was announced.
I don't remember. Richard Garriott is definitely a household name for any PC gamers at the time. I don't remember a lot about Tabula Rasa other than he was pushing the sci-fi aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why. Again, he's announcing that it's going to launch in 2003 and 2001. It doesn't launch until late 2007.
Oof. And
it gets shut down in 2009. I mean, it does not last long. There's a whole story of, all the problems that go into the development of the game. Mm-hmm. A lot of the early reactions to the game are not necessarily hugely positive. I think this idea of minimizing grind kind of ends up biting him in the butt because people get through the mission stuff way too quickly and there's just no way to produce enough content. That's just my outside perspective from reading a little bit about the game. I never played it myself. And so, yeah, it's one of those attempts at redefining the genre that doesn't quite hit because, let's face it, at the end of the day, you've got to keep the people playing. You have to keep them playing for a long time, and there's a reason why grind is still part of the MMO culture because it's the only way to generate enough hours of gameplay to keep the people satiated and keep them paying the monthly fee, which was still a standard at this point.
Yeah, what's the point of a monthly fee if you don't get any new content?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, Ultima Online was built around the idea that you had this functional world where you could do anything you wanted. I mean, there was the famous examples of people, renting out a building and then starting a theater company and charging people to come in, and they would, in real time, perform a play. With the characters going on the stage, moving around and typing their dialogue and stuff.
Oh, true.
That kind of stuff is the reason Ultima Online is still going today. They're still doing updates occasionally, but it's mainly because this world is a functioning world. I'm sure Tabula Rasa had a lot of those elements in it as well. It just didn't connect with the audience in the same way and didn't bring in the numbers needed, especially in a post-WoW world. Because he's announcing this for launch in 2003 and 2001. The one thing nobody knows is going to happen yet is WoW. Sure. And WoW shows up, I believe, 2005? So Tabula Rasa is going to come out 2 years after WoW. And it's just such a juggernaut. I don't think anybody was expecting it to be as big and as popular as it became, especially a game with Richard Garriott's type of philosophy of, you got to be able to do everything. Like in an Ultimate game, if it exists in the world, you have to play with it, blah, 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 blah. That's not WoW. WoW is not a game where, you can walk up to any building and figure out how to buy it or something. That's just not the game mechanic that they're going for. So,
yeah, well, I mean, a lot of those mechanics spawned out of players finding that versus it being handed to you out the gates.
And that's true too. Yes. And, and finding enough people who are willing to put in that kind of time for the discovery, as opposed to I just want to go on at night for an hour and grind out some levels or go on a quest or whatever, is difficult. And the MMO space is still active, still doing a lot, but I think that you really have to look at it as an evolutionary thing, where from what I've read about Tabula Rasa, again, I did not play it, so I'm a little bit at a disadvantage here, but from what I've read, it just didn't really hit the zeitgeist in 2007. Yeah. Oh, well. Speaking about not hitting the zeitgeist.
Oh, that's a good one.
Thank you.
Bleem finally makes it to the Dreamcast.
Despite Sony's best legal efforts, Bleem has managed to launch their first Dreamcast product. And now, remember, Bleem is the PlayStation emulator for PC at this point. A year ago at E3, Bleem was promising single discs that could emulate 100 PSX games each for the Dreamcast, but now they have only managed to get a single one-game disc out. For $5.99, you can buy a disc that allows you to run Gran Turismo 2 on your Dreamcast in beautiful 640 by 480 with all sorts of fun smoothing effects. 2 more discs would get released before the company finally folded.
Man, those were rocky times at that point for Bleem. I still have my PC Bleem box, that big, yellow, awkwardly sized box of Bleem in blue and red with an exclamation point, and have it going from that to a single disc. It's one of those things that, I mean, emulation's still kind of new at the time for that generation, so I like the upscaling, but it's to have that one disc off of, 100 games that you can play on it is definitely something else.
Yeah, and there's an interview in one of the magazines about this with an executive from the company. Essentially what happened was they just couldn't get the play testing done, apparently, to make sure that the games would work properly. And so they just decided to concentrate on the most important games. Given the fact that this is a Dreamcast, and given the fact that you're doing this off of disk, which means you had to put in the Bleem disk, load the emulator into RAM, and then take it out and put in your PlayStation disk. So you're going to have to get this emulator into the RAM in such a way that it's not going to slow down the rest of the gameplay. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably where they started running into performance problems of making sure, that everything was balanced out enough and the emulators just got probably way too complicated, because a lot of these PlayStation games, if you look at PlayStation emulation on PC even today, a lot of the emulators are working with a bunch of different plugins, and sometimes nowadays it's gotten really, really good with certain emulators, but it wasn't that long ago where, each game you put in, it was kind of a crapshoot if the plugins you had running were going to really emulate the system properly. Because while the PlayStation 1 was fairly straightforward, they were using so many tricks to make that very underpowered hardware do amazing things. There's no real reason Metal Gear Solid should work on a PlayStation. It's black magic getting that to work. Or you look at a game like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where the hardware doesn't do sprites. The hardware doesn't do anything in 2D, really. Mm-hmm. And instead, it's just saying, okay, we're using a 3D world, but flat planes, textures on the flat planes, and we're going to pretend they're sprites now. It's pretty bombastic, but it also means that emulating it wasn't always easy for a lot of the stuff that was using timing tricks of the CPU and stuff. Especially if you want to up the resolution, that's going to mess with all of your timing, because these are still consoles that are designed for CRTs. So they're doing scanline timing tricks.
Sure. I remember my experience with Bleem too. You'd have a lot, especially for those 2D games, you would have diagonal splits in the actual display, because I guess they were undercutting the timing, and you get the classic PlayStation pop on a 2D surface that you definitely don't want that on. I remember that a lot.
Exactly.
Texture smoothing too didn't help either.
Oh no, definitely not. And this is why there's a lot of stuff that they probably just couldn't pull off, and they say as much. They end up releasing 2 more discs. One of them is Metal Gear Solid, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the third disc was, but it's too little. Plus, the Dreamcast has already been discontinued at this point. this is the E3 where Sega is coming out as a software developer.
Yep.
And they're announcing all these games, Jet Grind Radio for the Xbox, Shenmue 2 for the Xbox, and so forth. And there's going to be a trickle of like 2 or 3 more Dreamcast titles, but that's it. The system is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Bleem is just like, there's a rumor that maybe they'll do it for the Xbox, but they've run out of money. They've spent all their load defending themselves against Sony in court. They don't have anything left for the extensive man hours necessary to proof the emulation for a new console.
Yeah, it's just such a classic example of just timing, and it just didn't work out, and it just kept piling on until they were done. And yeah, ongoing litigation is never good for the wallet.
Yeah, it's kind of unfair that kind of litigation can kill a company. I mean, they win, but at the end of the day, they get caught with their own legal fees. If they had been awarded legal fees, they probably would have been able to finance the move to Xbox. But
yeah, what a world that would have been to have an PlayStation on Xbox.
Oh, dude, Bleem on Xbox? I mean, granted, you get PlayStation emulation on Xbox later on, but it's not commercial. But it would have been groundbreaking to have PSX titles on there, because it would have meant that another one of the advantages of the PS2, the backward compatibility, would have been dissolved. But it's just one of those things that by the time, it probably wouldn't have meant anything because the emulator wouldn't have been out until the second year of the Xbox. And by then the PlayStation 2 catalog is so strong it doesn't matter. Nobody's looking at PS1 games when you have GTA 3. Nobody's going to go back to Driver. It's especially driving out of the one guy. There's always one guy.
I'm rooting for that one guy. I want to make sure that I see you.
Okay. But let's leave E3 news behind us now.
Sure, but speaking of Microsoft, Windows XP to introduce Microsoft product activation.
In an attempt to combat piracy, Microsoft will be introducing their new product activation system in Windows XP. The new system will require a code be entered that is unique to the license and machine the OS is installed on.
Yay, Windows.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the 98 had keys, but no product activation?
Exactly.
I'm trying to remember if 98 had... Yeah.
No product activation. That gets started with XP. And, this does up the ante a little bit. I mean, the old days of, everybody had their burnt Windows 95 disk with the code written on the CD, That's going to start going away. Obviously, this is before they're checking this stuff online. But that's the next step after this. So it is it's Microsoft clearly seeing that they can start to demand this, this locking it down to a single system, and you can almost tell in the way that they're setting it up. And this is a little bit speculation on my part, but I can imagine somebody there going, in 4 years everybody's going to have an internet connection. Then we can require internet verification.
Right.
And so, this is basically setting everybody up to expect this already.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a natural progression. It's funny to think about how long that is since we just had the announcement of stepping out of the time room about the Windows 11 announcement. It's been so long, I totally forgot about that. I remember in school they'd have those big banners with the CD key printed on it if they needed to activate something. It was just a different time, man. Different time.
Totally. Yeah, I was working in computer labs during college in the 90s, and I remember one time we had to redo like 50 machines in one lab. and we had this list of instructions, and each one of us was given a disk, and we just went from one computer to the next, reinstalling, and we had to go through the instructions line by line, and it was always the same code for each machine.
Right.
Totally messed up. Oh well. But piracy protects doesn't end with Microsoft.
It does not. Codemasters wants piracy to fade away.
Codemasters, ever the ingenious tech innovators, have introduced a new anti-piracy system called Fade, which can detect if a game has been copied and then slowly, over time, while the game is played, will delete or modify features to make the game unplayable.
Diabolical.
Diabolical, yes.
I read more into it. This is the only one that I did a little bit of research on after hearing about it, because it's anti-piracy, and it's still at this point in its infancy a bit with like modern optical technology, because I mean you had the protections on floppy disks and all that, but this, just purposefully corrupting sectors and slowly pulling away features as it decided you were so far pirated in your copy. It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the concept to basically make the game unplayable is not new. Famously, Elite 2 Frontier had this back, what was it, about 93, 94, where you started the game and it asked you for a check in the manual. So it'd be like, page 12, word 20 or whatever.
Yeah.
And you'd put it in. If you put it in wrong, they would ask you another check 10 minutes later. If you got it right, they would ask you another check 20 minutes later. So each time you got the check right, it doubled the time until the next check. Each time you got the check wrong, it halved the time until the next check.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, if you didn't have the manual, you were putting in the wrong answers, it would basically just break it down to like every second you'd be asked for a new check.
Right. But that piracy check is user driven at that point, though.
What do you mean by user driven?
So you would have to provide
the
that
IT
code.
person. You would have to provide the code. Yeah, you would have to open up the manual and find the right word.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it was just an annoyance for people who bought the game legitimately, because there were cracked copies out in the wild in no time, within days.
Right. Why penalize your players?
Exactly. But yeah, it's one of those situations where these kind of attempts at making the game unplayable or making the game extremely difficult, it was pirated, existed in the past. It's just this system is one that Codemasters is actually selling to other developers as well. And that, of course, also is something that had happened in the past. But since in the 30-year jumps, we've been talking a lot about Codemasters, coming up with new tech for the NES. This was just kind of a cool way to see how, that was still going on by 2001.
Sure. Yeah, they were never shy of innovating in whatever space they were working in. I've always admired the programmers of Codemasters, but this implementation, again, diabolical, but I love it.
Very, very.
I was reading that a later game from now, Arma, it would eventually turn you into a bird if you didn't pass the checks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it would.
That's awesome.
You would literally spawn as a bird, and it would put up a little cheeky message saying that you probably shouldn't pirate this. Little good birds don't pirate games or something. You could tell they had fun with it. But
definitely,
it's crazy.
Yeah, and this is cool because it gave them a little bit of control, and at the same time, you got to play just long enough to get into the game that it might inspire you to go and actually buy it. And yeah, I mean, and Codemasters, the history of the company itself is super cool, and we'll probably be hitting it in a couple of years in the 40-year jump. and they started out as one of these super low budget companies in England back in the day. You know, it was like £3 for a game on cassette or something. So they're an interesting company in and of themselves. The fact that they're still around, and well, didn't they just get sold? I think they just got sold.
Yeah, I think they did. I mean, they've been pioneering the whole like driving sim or sim-like games now, but that's what they ended up being known for.
Yeah,
these days. But yeah, we'll see what becomes of that. Was that Microsoft that bought them? I'm trying to remember who bought them.
Good question. It could have been Microsoft, but I honestly can't remember anymore. I'd have to look it up.
Oh, it's okay.
I'm sure that Ethan will set us straight there.
Yes.
Ethan, go for it. Okay. Switching gears, since we're talking about driving sims. Ha ha ha.
Yes. Edge Magazine recommends The Dot Eaters.
This month's website of the month in the UK magazine Edge is The Dot Eaters, a website dedicated to the early years of arcade gaming. The site is still going strong today.
I love that title. It's perfect.
Oh, it is. It is. And this was one of these early, not emulation, but retro gaming information websites. And there were a ton of them at the time, a lot of, fly-by-nights, a lot of stuff that wasn't quite accurate and so forth. A lot of them, unfortunately, have faded away and disappeared. But the Dot Eaters has survived, and the fact that it got this highlight in Edge magazine 20 years ago was one of those cool things, because a lot of us found out about these websites through magazines. It seems, weird to say that, but that's how we found out about a lot of these websites back in the day.
Sure. Yeah, I was, as an avid PC gamer reader, I was still, they'd always highlight, and eventually they would highlight mods and things you could get online to extend your game.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there was a ton of that kind of stuff that I found out about through the magazines. I mean, at the time, or better said, nowadays, you'd think, well, why would the magazine be promoting stuff that's online? But at the same time, those were the resources of the game. They were telling us how things were evolving, and it just made a lot of sense to talk about them, because it's also a lot of free content to fill the magazine with.
True, very true.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I just wanted to highlight that little aspect before we move into corporate news.
Microsoft buys Ensemble.
Ensemble Studios, creators of the Age of Empires series, has been purchased by Microsoft. The move will help Microsoft consolidate IP that it was already publishing.
I just assumed they were always part of Microsoft. That's really funny. It took them this long. I grew up with Age of Empires. That's a whole series that's near and dear to my heart. And as far as I know, that's all they've been working on, outside of the latest Halo Wars game.
Yeah, that's one of those things where Ensemble, I don't believe, exists anymore. They get dissolved years and years later after this. But yeah, they get bought up by Microsoft at this point, basically because I think Microsoft didn't want to lose them. There was no point in not acquiring them, Sure. Last thing you wanted to do was to leave, and even though Microsoft probably would have controlled the Age of Empires IP, it wouldn't have done them any good if they'd had to put together a whole new team that wasn't familiar enough with the IP to deliver quality content.
Sure, or it could be alienating for the players if you release a game under a dev team that's just not the same game.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's the earliness of Microsoft making good moves with their studio purchases, and knowing which IPs work well.
Exactly. And I mean, it's Microsoft at this point, even though they've been publishing computer games for a long time. I mean, hell, they were publishing computer games in the late 70s already. but really getting into the gaming side of things, Age of Empires was a watershed moment for them. And it just makes sense that Ensemble Studios becomes part of the family.
Right. It's about time. Come to the family. Speaking of close partners and family, Namco,
nice
Enix,
transition.
and Square. Thank you. Yeah. Namco, Enix, and Square announced mutual stock purchases.
In a move no doubt driven by Japan's weak economy, Namco, Enix, and Square, three of the country's biggest game publishers, have agreed to buy up to 5% of each other's stocks and collaborate. This would be the foundation of merger talks between Square and Enix that would be delayed until 2003 due to Square's finances taking a turn for the worse after the Final Fantasy movie flopped.
The Final Fantasy movie wasn't good?
Oh my god, no. It was a masterclass in suckage.
There's so much. Yeah, I saw a documentary recently that someone had put together on YouTube about, just the whole course that took. Like they put so much into it. And
they created their own rendering farms and stuff and developed their own software for it. And it, number one, just reading the script, you probably would have known this is going to blow.
Right. Then
putting in that much money, I mean, Square had gone from strength to strength to strength, and all they needed to do was a movie adaptation of Final Fantasy VII, and they would have been home free. Okay? No matter how bizarre and weird that was, instead they delivered something that had no connection with the Final Fantasy franchise. There was not a chocobo in sight. And it was boring as hell. I remember sitting there in the theater going, what?
Right.
And the why? And the I have no idea what's going on. I think I actually may have dozed off for a moment or two.
Yeah, I remember droning through it when I saw it. Although they will eventually come back and release Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, which probably would have gone a lot better had they done that the first time.
Definitely. Hell, they could have just up-res the PlayStation graphics. It was such a popular franchise at that point, people would have paid money to see that.
Sure.
Well, but yes.
Points for trying. Yeah, we were definitely digressing a bit too. I forgot about... I mean, it's weird thinking about Square and Enix not as a mutual company these days. We've reviewed some of Enix's releases on the podcast, and that was my real exposure to Enix as a company, because prior to then it was all your Final Fantasies, and even had Super Mario RPG for the...
Yeah, and suddenly you got a little bit of the Dragon Quest fever.
Yeah, that's... oh man, the guys hated it, but I loved it, and I can't think of the title right now. It was part of the whole like Enix trilogy that they did for the SNES, but
I can't remember now. I remember that episode, but
RoboTrek, that's what it was called. Yeah, but we'll leave it at that. I'll
link to the episode in the show notes.
Sounds good. But that's interesting with the stock trading to
basically the idea, and this is a very common practice apparently in Japanese business, where the companies will sort of help each other out. Mm-hmm. And there's this whole idea of community amongst the companies, even when they're competitors. So this idea that these three big companies are going to buy each other's stocks, it's leading to speculation that there's also going to be mutual licensing of IP for different things that, you might see characters from Soul Edge or Tekken show up in a Final Fantasy type game or whatever. I don't believe any of that actually materializes. I could be wrong, but I don't think any of it materializes. But it's very important to understand just how weak the Japanese economy is at this point, which it's a really bad downturn. One of the reasons why the PlayStation 2 may not have been performing quite as well as they had hoped. Another reason why the Game Boy Advance, which is just launched in Japan, is selling like gangbusters because it's so much cheaper than everything else. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it would have sold great no matter what, but this is helping that. So, you know, these guys coming together, buying each other's stock, having some mutual interest in one another to sort of bolster each other, to show unity and cooperation. It's an important moment, but like I said, Square and Enix are seriously considering mergers, and probably at this point Square is the stronger of the two companies. Mm-hmm. But by the time the Final Fantasy movie flops, Enix is by far the strongest. But Enix is going to say no to the merger until Square has turned their finances around and stabilized themselves in 2003.
Right.
Yeah. So they're going to have to launch a few more Final Fantasy games and stuff to really get back to where they needed to be. And then again, some of their early PlayStation 2 games like The Bouncer also didn't help because it was a hot mess.
Right.
Have you ever played The Bouncer?
No, I have not.
Oh.
Was it that good?
It's a dog. It's a real dog. Oh, man,
you should have given me that one. I didn't. Well, I guess.
It came out a while ago from the jump standpoint. Yeah.
No worries.
But, okay. Speaking of companies not doing well.
DigiSense has been sent to the grave.
Yeah. The pun doesn't work quite as well if you can't see it written out now that I look at it.
Just assume I did air quotes. You guys are good.
Okay, there you go. DigiSense, the company trying to bring olfactory sensations to the world of computing through add-on devices that would spray scents at users, has closed its doors. We reported on them originally a year ago in our July 2000 jump.
It's so funny that a company like this failed. And we're seeing companies like this actually getting close to succeeding in the VR future that we live in.
Let me put it this way. I will believe it when I see it if somebody actually pulls this off. Not from a technical standpoint. Because technically, according to all the reviewers, this thing worked.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess because the cartridge tech would be the only thing that would have to catch up, and I guess we can, we'll see. But the whole idea that we can, cut off the other senses and then put scent in that space that's being cut off, that could work.
Yeah, I mean the cartridge system, they had this little weird cartridge that you plugged in and it mixed the chemicals to create dozens and dozens of scents and stuff. That all worked. It's just no investors were really interested in it because it was like, when and where do I use this?
Right, exactly. This was before the internet was super common too, because you couldn't really smell websites at the time.
Well, I mean, this is the funny thing. I mean, by 2000, the internet is common enough. The question, though, is, I mean, what does CNN smell like?
Right, exactly.
If I'm watching a horrible disaster, do I want to smell rotten corpses or something? I mean,
all of a sudden, the sewer levels got way less appealing.
Exactly. I mean, there's this question of, when would you use this? And investors just didn't want to put any more money into it. They just abandoned the project or abandoned the company. So that's why it went under. They just couldn't get the financing to bring the product to market.
No, I get it. That's especially for the 2000s time, early 2000s. It was definitely a timing thing. And why?
Yeah. Well, plus it would have had to have been a mass market thing. It's not like today where you could have sold it online. maybe develop it as a niche product like VR is. It was going to have to be something that you were going to be able to sell at a retail outlet in retail numbers. And that probably would have failed.
Sure, yeah, I'm just trying to think of the GameStop tech or the the Babbages and the Funkolands, trying to explain what the heck this thing is. It's just not. Yeah, this is a bit of a rabbit hole, so we'll leave it at that. Rest in peace, DigiSense. Another one bites the dust. Indreama Dreams No More.
Indreama, the company that wanted to launch a Linux-based open source console, which we talked about in our May 2000 jump, has shut its doors. Lack of investor support was the end of this one. 2.
Yeah, I like the way you said Indreama. They might have not failed if they had you selling it.
They were going to fail no matter what. I mean, this was the Ouya before the Ouya. This was,
True.
The problem with that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, like, if a commercial, if it had you saying Ouya, I would buy it. I would be sold immediately.
The real problem with the Indreama, and I think it was the head of the company in one of the interviews says, they were like $2 million short or something. It was a relatively small amount of money short of being able to launch. The problem with it is it was relying on the developers to just sort of show up. And, there's a reason why you have publishers. There's a reason why you have people, paying licensing fees to get onto the PlayStation or the Xbox or Nintendo's consoles, because you also want the marketing that those companies bring with it. You want the quality control that those companies bring with it. And a completely open source console is just an invitation for buggy software, stuff that doesn't work, viruses, whatever you want to talk about. All of that stuff would be open to this box. You'd basically have to know how to troubleshoot the machine in order to use the machine.
It sounds like a computer in a time when consoles were shuttering their doors. I like where their heart's at, but I get why it didn't work out. And just the whole it'd be like put it on the street corner and just be like, here's my thing, and that's it.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like in the days before Steam, if you wanted to buy games online, and back in around 2000, there were a ton of indie developers that, you could buy the software directly off their website, give them your credit card number and they'd give you a download code or something. That was happening. It's just you never really knew who you were dealing with. You never really knew if the software was going to work or not work or what the support would be. If you went to a store, a GameStop or something, you bought a box product. If it didn't work, you took it back. So that having that middleman controlling the quality, because if GameStop suddenly gets 90% of their sales back, they're going to go straight back to the publisher that same month and say, hey, dude, we want our money back. Take back this product. And it forces then the developers to also keep a certain quality level. Now, granted, stuff still gets through the cracks, but the big rigs, the famously. But
yeah, it's that accountability aspect.
Yeah. And I mean, before you give somebody my credit card number, I need to make sure that everything's on the up and up. I mean, and so this is why these guys just didn't have, I think, a functional business plan. That's what was missing. The idea of basing it off of Linux, not terrible, would have been very helpful for developers. Having a known hardware architecture, also cool. I mean, that's kind of what Xbox is leveraging. But they needed to have a business model of how they're going to support those developers.
Mm-hmm.
And they just didn't have that.
Yeah, it's quite unfortunate, but
Yeah.
good on them for trying. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's got to try at some point. I mean, that's cool. Okay. That brings us to the end of the news. John, that also means we're at the end of our time travels. Looking back on all of these stories, what would you say is the word of the day?
Hyphenated, broken dreams.
Hyphenated, broken dreams. Okay, I dig it. I totally dig it. Awesome. Okay, that will conclude another episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. John, as always, thank you for coming in and helping us out. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, you can find us retrogamesquad.com. We're also on your favorite podcast provider. Just look us up. And
Discord. Plug the Discord.
And we love to continue the conversation on our side of things for our Discord at discord.retrogamesquad.com. Thank you.
Links in the show notes below. Okay. With that being said, everybody also remember, if you want to watch the video version of John playing Super Bombad Racing, that is up on our Patreon, the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine Patreon. And if you become a member for as low as $1 a month, you'll be able to access all the video versions of the 7 Minutes in Heaven that are currently up there, as well as get early access, 3 months early access to our interview episodes. So check that out. Lots of good stuff over there. And also follow us on the Twitter and the Instagram and whatnot. All the links are in the show notes. I just recently did a massive update to the Instagram because it was like 3 months out of date. But, you know, it's damn them for only letting me use my phone to do it, because I don't really like doing that stuff on my phone. Okay, with that being said, John, have fun.
Will do. Thanks again for having me.
No problem. Always a pleasure.